Let me certainly thank the Mayor of the City of Detroit and all of those who have gathered here on this day as a collective display of unity for this unfortunate occasion by which we have assembled. Let me share this statement with you, and then I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Mary Barnes, CEO of General Motors Corporation. Today, our nation stands at a crossroad. One road leads forward towards justice and equity. Another road leads backwards towards injustice and inequality. I'm glad to be here today as we encourage our city and, quite frankly, cities around the nation to take the road towards justice and equity. This is a moment in history that we will never, ever know again. The moment is historic because I don't know of any other city in America where as many corporate leaders, 9+, representing over 600,000 employees, many of them who are, of course, African Americans living in our neighborhoods around the nation, including the big three auto companies, coming together to speak out and affirm their commitment to justice. Justice in the enforcement of the law, justice and fairness of its application, and equity in its representation. As a result of the recent murders of Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, and most recently George Floyd in Minnesota, along with so many others, too many to be counted, many taken too soon and much too tragically, they have come to join with every other American who believes it is our responsibility to speak out against the racism and white supremacy and injustice that we are witnessing in our country. It is indeed unusual to have CEOs to stand up publicly and declare their solidarity with those who are peacefully marching, exercising their First Amendment rights to bring about change and accountability in the justice system. This is a unique moment because several of them have already issued letters or statements to their employees internally on the need for justice throughout our nation. They come further acknowledging that the coronavirus disease of 2020 has exposed even more the stark disparities that continue to exist in programs and policies within the African American community. These disparities, more often than not, lead to a tragic death and a disparate reduction in the quality of life for people of color already suffering too much poverty and too much pain. I suggested to the mayor of the city, and he quickly agreed and supported for them that we, while it is good to issue a statement internally, it is even more and better to stand together publicly and speak the truth to these issues. These are CEOs of Detroit's largest companies. Their speaking out means something for the nation. Their speaking out means something for the nation. It sets a tone for other CEOs in other states and in other cities. It is only typical of the city of Detroit, where we have always had a history of firsts. First with the auto industry, first with Motown, first with Dr. King's March of 1963 when he delivered his infamous I Have a Dream speech. Let us remember that it was more than just a speech. It was an idea. It was a workable plan for equity of opportunity throughout this land. It was a plan where we should judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Well, the plan for justice and equity is still workable and is still in demand. Now, some will say these CEOs are just here for show and it's not going to make a difference. I say how wrong you are. I say anytime people stand up for justice and truth, it does make a difference. I say it adds a new ingredient into the justice equation. When business leaders leave the corporate suite and connect with that which is positive and calling out from the street, I say as Dr. King said, the time is always right to do what is right. This is the time. Following Dr. King's tragic death, finally, April 4th, 1968, President Lyndon Baines Johnson wrote a letter to the joint session of Congress. April 6th, Johnson said in his letter, the tragedy should prompt all good men to look deeply into their hearts when the nation so urgently needs the healing balm of unity. A brutal wound on our conscience forces upon all of us this question: what more can I do to achieve brotherhood and equality among all Americans? These CEOs are here not only because they have chosen to respond to the pain and the anguish of injustice in the African American community today, but that they will remain committed to the roadway of justice and equity tomorrow. Let us now hear from Detroit's corporate leadership, beginning with Mary Barra, Chairman and CEO of the General Motors Corporation. Ms. Barra.
Well, thank you, Reverend Anthony. Last week, I wrote a letter to the General Motors team. In it, I shared my thoughts about what is happening in the world today. And I received hundreds and hundreds of responses from employees, many with words of support, some with words of skepticism about whether things will really change, and others still with personal stories of how racism has impacted their lives. As a mother of two, these stories broke my heart. At GM, we aspire to be the most inclusive company in the world, and our hope is that every company will do the same. I know the corporate leaders who stand behind me completely agree with this goal. And while there might not be a precise roadmap for how it will happen, that's not an excuse to not work on it and to not try. So inclusion will be our North Star. And every day we will take steps in service of our aspiration. And that is why I am so proud to be here today. Today I'm committing to you, as I did to the people of General Motors, that we will no longer allow the company to indulge of asking why. Today I'm committing that we will be a company focused on what. What can we do? What will we do? Like all the leaders here today, we want to be part of meaningful, deliberate change. We'll not allow ourselves the passivity of urging others to act. We will act. We commit to inclusion, and that means creating conditions where every single human who believes in inclusion is welcome within our walls. Where those conditions do not exist, we will bring forth the resources and the rigor to ensure they do. We know we're not perfect. Pretending to be is part of the problem. To any GM employees who have the courage to speak up, we will hear you. We unequivocally condemn intolerance, and that means racism, bigotry, discrimination, and any other form of named or unnamed hatred. When hatred exists within our house, we will root it out. To any GM employees who feel they cannot bring their full self to work, we will see you. We will stand up against injustice, and that means taking the risk of expressing unpopular or polarizing points of view, because complacency and complicity sit in the shadow of silence. To any GM employees who feel like we should leverage GM's voice, we will speak out. Today is an important moment for all of our organizations, and it starts with listening to each other and listening inside and outside the company. Because awareness leads to dialogue, dialogue leads to understanding, and understanding leads to change. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I now would like to introduce Bill Ford, Executive Chairman of the Ford Motor Company.
Well, thank you, Mary. And thank you, Mayor Duggan and Reverend Anthony, for pulling us all together today. My family's been part of the fabric of this community for generations. My great-grandfather, Henry Ford, started the Ford Motor Company 117 years ago in Detroit. It was one of the first employers in the country to offer Black Americans jobs in his facilities and to pay all races the same wage. And since then, my family has invested heavily in Detroit and believed in this community, even as others left. I'm proud of my own journey, which includes Ford Field, Corktown, the train station, as well as many community programs in support of this city and this community. I love this city. It's not just where we do business, it's our home. We should be proud of how far Detroit has come. But the recent tragic events remind us of how far we have yet to go. We're seeing outrage and real-time expression of years and years of collective pain, and this pain is felt deeply here in Detroit. Our community can't thrive if all members can't participate in its progress, and if some are excluded and targeted because of the color of their skin. There are no easy answers, and we aren't interested in superficial actions. This is our moment to lead and work together to effect real lasting change. At Ford, we're committed to listen, to engage with leaders, to build a city, a state, and a country that provides access for all, and to eliminate the fear that far too many African American members face each day. It would be easy to say that one person, one company, or even a group of companies can't make a difference, that the issues are too deep. But I don't believe that. I've seen what we can do in Detroit. Together, we must commit to change and build a community which embraces all of our children. Thank you, and now I'd like to introduce Mark Stewart, the COO of FCA North America. Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Mayor Duggan. Thank you, Reverend Anthony, for the opportunity to join this gathering and to stand together today as a business community, as a Detroit community, in the fight against racism and discrimination. I speak on behalf of the nearly 200,000 Fiat Chrysler Global family members, 36,000 right here in Southeast Michigan and in the city of Detroit, when I express our absolute deepest sorrow for the senseless death of George Floyd, and indeed for the many lives that have been lost in the scourge of racism that continues to blight our communities, both here and around the country. It's tragedy, it's injustice that's brought us here together today, and we mourn the loss of our brothers and sisters. Sadly, our society today has settled into somewhat sense of complacency, where there's tolerance and acceptance around social injustices. And I say to you today, no more. No more. Racism of any kind is divisive, it's ugly, and it brings about the worst of humanity. Today I'm talking to you as a leader, I'm talking to you as a person deeply disturbed by the recent events, and like many of you, the gamut of emotions running through all of us in reaction to what's happened in these last weeks. But today, instead of sadness or the pain, I feel strength. Strength from our communities. Strength from our conviction that we can bring about social change. We've got to continue to partner together, community leaders, business leaders, government, all of us, to find the solutions to shift our society and stand against racism, against violence. Personally and professionally, I stand for complete inclusion and celebrate diversity at my very core. And again, I speak for our leadership and our entire FCA family as I say that you have our collective commitment to be a part of the solution, to help lead the solution for racial justice. At FCA, we very proudly and very loudly represent a wide diversity of race, of creed, of beliefs, and that's why I'm so proud to be a part of the FCA family. I've seen my family harness their energies and passion to be a meaningful force for change, creating new job opportunities from the new plant we're building here in Detroit with 5,000 new jobs, education programs for our children, internships for our children, creating lots of new opportunities, including educating ourselves and educating our communities, and to stand with our communities to celebrate our cultural, our color, and our faith differences. Thank you to all my colleagues here today for bringing your commitment as well for us to help drive change. And thank you, Mayor, thank you, Reverend, for bringing us together again. I stand united with all of you as we commit to make a real and a lasting change, a lasting difference against the struggle of racism both here in this city and across the country. Detroit is a place I'm very proud to call my adopted family, my adopted home, and we will make a difference together. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Jay Farner from Quicken Loans. Jay.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mayor and Reverend, for having us here. This morning I have the privilege of representing our more than 25,000 team members who love and stand by this city. As you all know, Dan Gilbert moved our offices here nearly 10 years ago because we're committed to the success of Detroit. Our connection to this city has never been stronger. I'd like to share a portion of a message that I sent to our team members this weekend because it highlights this commitment to the city and our need to ensure a strong and safe Detroit. As the CEO of the Rock family of companies, I am committed to ensuring our African American team members feel safe. More importantly, our team members need to continue being heard and feel comfortable expressing pain and frustration without fear of reprisal. What makes our family of companies amazing is its people and the varied life experiences they bring. In partnership with Trina Scott, our Chief Diversity Officer, and leaders across the family of companies, I immediately instituted an action plan to advance meaningful and lasting discussions and actions on race, police brutality, and inclusion. Our mandate remains clear: to ensure a safe environment where all can flourish and grow. I'd like to specifically speak to two portions of that action plan. First, regarding the Detroit Police Department. We are working together with Trina Scott, Chuck Wilson, our Chief Security Officer, to leverage our current relationships and increase our communications so that we can convey concerns, exchange ideas, and yes, hold each other accountable. We're also hopeful to set a date for a town hall for our family of companies, where our team members can meet with the DPD and share views, including opportunities and challenges. I've asked our government affairs team to connect the concerns of our team members with the government agencies that we work with and use our voice to advocate in the support of equality at all governmental levels. Again, I want to thank all of the leaders here on stage. I cannot express how strongly I personally feel on this matter. Our great city depends on all of us, everyone who's committed to our community. This is something we can only successfully address if we stand together. And now I'd like to introduce Wright Lassiter, President and CEO of Henry Ford Health Systems.
Good morning. It's my privilege to be here representing 35,000 team members at Henry Ford Health System and our more than 5,000 physicians that practice across southeastern Michigan. Mayor Duggan, it's my pleasure to stand here with you. Reverend Anthony, thank you for inspiring this event and causing us all to be here. To my business colleagues, I'd say thank you for standing in solidarity as we address the issues that are not just facing our country, but plaguing our country. As I think about coming here this morning, I've been reflecting on a lot of issues, as I think most of us have as leaders. And I would just start out with this. As we watch the tragic and traumatic events that have taken place across our country in the last few months, it's challenging to adequately put into words the emotions, the anger, the anguish, and the exasperation that people are feeling, including myself. As a relative newcomer to Detroit, I was not here in 1967. I didn't experience what this community experienced then. But as I look at TV and see what's happening in Detroit and in cities across this country, it harkens me back to my upbringing. You see, I was born in the segregated South. I grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama. And from the early mid-1960s through the 1970s, I was raised in the hotbed of the civil rights movement. My parents participated in the 1965 Selma March. I had civil rights activists like Myrlie Evers in my living room chatting with my parents about the assassination of her husband in 1963. And as I reflect on that, I was too young to understand. I was too young to understand what happened in 63 and 65 and 67 or in 68 with the assassination of Martin Luther King. But as I think about how we've arrived at this moment, in my humble opinion, the etiology of this fractured state that we're existing, it comes down to two things: intolerance and indifference. As the world's most diverse melting pot, we continue to struggle to lift ourselves from our troubled beginnings. The inescapable gravitational force that our history of slavery imparts upon our nation continues to sow seeds that are hurtful, that are insidious, and times are right in our face. With prejudice and injustice, intolerance in full view in the last couple of months with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and now George Floyd, I'm hopeful that appropriate justice will happen and that our nation will wrap these communities in our support and prayers. Yet I'm reminded of a quote from Martin Luther King sharing that a riot is a language of the unheard. In other words, what we're seeing in our communities are reflective of the fact that our nation is not listening. So at this moment, as we stand here, at times like these, we must all decide if we're going to stand silent and turn away from the fray, choosing comfort over progress, indifference, or will we summon the courage that exists in all of us when we're confronted with acts that violate our sense of dignity and humanity. Henry Ford Health System has 4 core values. 2 of them are compassion and respect. Those 2 values drive us. Those 2 values have us mourning for the losses that we see across our country, has us angry for the actions that are occurring too frequently in our communities, and it has us even more forthright in saying that we will not stand for injustice or intolerance, for disparities in healthcare, or disparities, period. We know that our organization, like all the ones standing here, aren't perfect. We understand, however, that no matter what we've been doing throughout our history, we can and we will do more. I would leave you with a quote by Myrlie Evers Williams, where she says, "I've reached a point in my life where I understand the pain and the challenge, and my attitude is one of standing up with open arms to meet them all." Thank you. I now would like to introduce Chris Ilitch, President and CEO of Ilitch Holdings.
All right, thank you, Wright. Today, we stand together to champion equality, justice, and respect for the African American community. And I'm proud to stand with those who support diversity and inclusion and condemn hatred and racism, prejudice, and violence. I want to join in thanking Mayor Duggan and Reverend Anthony for bringing us together. No doubt, these have been difficult days. We all mourn the tragic and all too common loss of African American lives. We are saddened, we are troubled, we are angry. But anger is not enough. We have a moral obligation to meet intolerance and injustice with action and resolve. We need to peacefully and productively channel our grief and shared sense of decency into lasting and positive change. The strength of this city lies in the spirit of this city and in the grace and the goodwill of its people. It lies in our ability to rally, to rise, and to demand better. Like all of you, I love this city. It's why my parents moved our headquarters here, and it's why we've grown our businesses here. We are proud and privileged to call Detroit home. But with that comes responsibility, a responsibility to help lead and uplift the community in times like this. And that's what today is all about. Collectively acknowledging the systemic issues facing the African American community and collectively demanding and helping to deliver meaningful solutions. It's not enough to simply stand here and talk. Now is the time for us to act. To the African American community, let me say, we see and hear you, we respect you, we stand with you. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dan Lepp, President and CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Reverend Anthony, Mayor, thank you for the invitation. Over the last 4 or 5 months, 6 months, there's been a lot going on. We at Blue Cross have been from the beginning involved in the health disparities issue and have been working hard to try, to get it out in the public. Well, unfortunately, with COVID, if anybody doesn't think that there are health disparities in Michigan and America, they're blind. They're blind to the truth. And I've been talking to our colleagues at Blue Cross. We, like many others, have sent messages and open letters to our colleagues at Blue Cross. And I've had hundreds of conversations over the last, since this played out, and especially with my colleagues of color. And people are tired. They're tired of people dying, whether it's COVID or on the streets. They're mad. They're afraid. And I think, one of the most poignant conversations, and it was about 4 or 5 of them, and it was basically the same conversation, where it was different ages of in most cases, it was women of color, of saying that they dread having had to have had the talk when they had it. And now they dread that they're going to have to do it again, even though they know it's a must and they have to do it. But they're going to have that same talk with their grandson and their granddaughter. That's got to stop. And I think what you see up here today is a good start. But it's all about action. And I think I have been CEO of Blue Cross for 15 years, was born and raised in the city. And I have never seen a group of people more committed to doing something. And I hope that what comes out of this, besides action, is that we actually get to a metric where you don't have to have the talk. That's a very tall order. But if we eradicate injustice, and there is justice for all, both black and white, maybe there'll be a time where you don't have to have that talk. And so we're going to work strong, and I'm hoping that this message goes out to the corporate community across America. because it's not only Detroit and, of course, worldwide companies that are represented here, but it's got to happen across America and across the world, and we're certainly committed to do that. So thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Jerry Anderson, Executive Chairman of DTE Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Reverend Anthony, for putting this together this morning. This is a very good thing. So we wrote to DTE's many thousand employees this weekend about the events of recent days that have occurred across our community and across our country. And what we heard in return, particularly from our African American employees, was pain and frustration and, frankly, just exhaustion with it all. And those feelings stem not only from the shameful death in Minneapolis and in Kentucky and in Georgia, but also stemmed from the intense impact of the coronavirus in our city over the past several months, and so many deaths and lives touched by deaths, and so many goodbyes that were never able to be properly said. And we know that this pain and this frustration and this exhaustion in the DTE African American community is mirrored across our city, across our state, and across our country. And so the first thing that I want to say is to DTE's African American community, but also to the African American citizens of Detroit, is that we stand with you in your pain and in your frustration and in your exhaustion. When any among us are demeaned or denied basic human rights, we're all dehumanized. And it's only by standing with those who are demeaned that we have a chance of regaining some measure of our humanity. But after the pain and the protests pass, we're going to need persistence. We're going to need persistence to see through practical, tangible changes. And I would be foolish to offer simple solutions to deep-seated issues. There are so many things that need to change. The creation of economic and educational opportunity chief among them. But we also need to persist in seeing through reforms in our criminal justice system and reforms where the police departments, which are so critical to the functioning of our communities, where those police departments have lost their way, we need to undertake reform. Now, the mayor has asked me to read 4 commitments that we have all jointly agreed to in the spirit of concrete, tangible change and persistence around those. First, we commit ourselves and our companies to reject and work to eliminate all forms of bias, racism, sexism, violence within our communities and within our companies. Second, we call upon the appropriate government officials to hold accountable all individuals involved with the deaths that have occurred. Every person must be held responsible and accountable for his or her actions. Third, we support the calls for an independent prosecution of those accused in order to demonstrate the fairness and eliminate any possibilities of conflicts in the course of this judicial process. And finally, fourth, we will invest in programs and policies that help to transform the disparities that exist within these communities as we remain partners in progress, both locally and nationally. And on the national stage, I would simply say that this is a time when we need the healing power of compassion, not discord, not bitterness, not partisanship. We all need to step forward with that compassion. Mr. Mayor, Reverend Anthony, thank you so much for allowing me to express some thoughts at this important time. Oh, Gary Torgo, yes, will be next.
Mayor Duggan, thank you for including us. Reverend Anthony, for your leadership. I am honored to represent the thousands of team members of TCF Bank, the largest headquartered bank in the state of Michigan and headquartered here in the city of Detroit. For all its greatness, America is a nation founded on the Bill of Rights, but long plagued by what NAACP co-founder W.E.B. Du Bois called the color line. He coined that phrase in 1903 to connect America's institutions of slavery to its enduring shame. We stand here today because Du Bois' color line tragically still remains. As our friend and leader, the Reverend Wendell Anthony, reminds me often, every citizen has a stake in this reality. We are here today to make our best efforts once and for all to change that reality because it demands it of all of us. It starts with the great men and women joining us today here, great civic and business leaders who left the comfort and privilege of corner offices to condemn the history of bigotry and police brutality that stains the soul of this country. For far too long, there have been men and women of power who deny the truth of racism. Not today and not anymore. George Floyd is the latest tragedy in a centuries-long line of African Americans to suffer violent deaths at the hands of police officers. They were victims of a law enforcement system that truly produces legions of dedicated public servants, but unfortunately also shields murderers in their midst. I was in my office when I saw the alarming headline on TV. It said, "Warning, the contents of this video may be disturbing." You've all seen the video. It's horrific and sickening. A white police officer plunged his knee into the neck of Mr. Floyd and kept it there for 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Passerbys videotaped it, unable to save Mr. Floyd from the grisly clutches as he said, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." We do believe that most police officers in this country are exceptional, dedicated public servants, and we owe all of them our eternal gratitude. But there are still, unfortunately, some who use their badges as a license to do and cause harm. We stand here today to drive a stake in that reality. We condemn Mr. Floyd's violent murder, and we share the grief and fear and anger of our community. Our hearts go out to the men and women who have endured the pain and suffering of bigotry. We unite together in rejecting all forms of bias and racism and violence in our workplaces and in our communities. Our purpose calls on us to strengthen businesses and individuals, and especially in times of tragedy, to help those who are hurting the most. We will double down on our purposeful engagement with our cities and neighborhoods, especially where peaceful protests were interrupted by agitators seeking unrest and destruction. The corporate citizens that I stand here with today understand fully that a company is only as healthy as the community it serves. Our American community is hurting. In the cities and towns where we serve, especially in our beloved hometown of Detroit, we will and must champion causes supporting social justice because, Reverend Anthony, you are absolutely right. Every citizen, every one of us, has a stake in the harsh reality that is life for minorities in America. Together we will endeavor to consign the color line to the ash heap of history. For all its faults, America is a community of great people, ever striving to be better and to form a more perfect union. Together we can make every citizen truly equal under the law because we were all created equal by our Creator in heaven. Thank you for letting me be here today. It is my great pleasure to introduce the leader of the City of Detroit, Mayor Mike Duggan.
Well, good morning. As Reverend Anthony and I reached out to these corporate citizens, there's been so much talk about what we can do and what programs and what laws and what reforms. And they said, what do you want? And what Reverend Anthony and I said to him is, tomorrow, we want something that we rarely get in the corporate community. We want your voice. We don't want a vice president or a communications director. If you personally believe that the death of George Floyd was an inexcusable tragedy, it was a crime, it can't happen again, it's going on too long, we want your voice. And as Reverend Anthony said at the beginning, you may wonder what is so unique about this, except it hasn't happened. I just think about 20 years ago. 20 years ago today, I was running for Wayne County prosecutor in the year 2000. And one of the main things I talked about was that in 2000, the Detroit Police Department had the highest rate of shootings of citizens of any police department in the country. And longtime Detroiters all remember the name Eugene Brown, a police officer who in 6 years was involved in 9 shootings, killed 3 people, and never had a charge brought against him. In each case, he was investigated by the Detroit Police Department, who found his actions justified. And I was appalled at this, and I had a lot of support in the business community, and I was running, I would say, this has to stop. They can't investigate themselves. When I'm prosecutor, the very first thing I'm going to do is appoint an independent division of the prosecutor's office that will go out to every single shooting scene. We will not let the police department do the investigation. We will do the investigation. We will oversee the evidence. We will handle the witnesses. We will decide to bring the charges. It made a lot of the cops mad. But when I was campaigning and I talked to the business leaders who were supporting me, and I would tell them how important this was, the reaction I got was a lot of skepticism. Are you really sure the people were innocent? That these cops shot? It wasn't their experience. And in this country, it wasn't just the business leaders. It was the indifference of white America to the mistreatment of African Americans in the hands of police officers that's created the deep and gaping wound in this country. It's happened over a long time. And when that officer put his knee down on George Floyd's neck, it ripped that scab off and it's bleeding. And now we have to face it. 20 years later, the Detroit Police Department is a very different place. Not just with what I did, but 10 years of federal government oversight, great leadership, and they've changed. And I tell you what else is different. There is a whole different generation of business leadership. At the time that companies were bailing out of this city, going to the suburbs or other states, the 9 people standing here, every one of them, moved jobs and investment into Detroit. They went against the trend. And what triggered this was yesterday morning, Reverend Wendell Anthony called me, and he said to me, I want to read you something. And he had a letter that Gary Torgel wrote. And he reads this to me, and he reads this letter, he says, we demand the prosecution of every police officer complicit in this racist slaying, a hate crime. And the entire letter, you have to read it, is so powerful. And Reverend Anthony said to me, I never expected this type of socially conscious attack on racism and law enforcement to be written by a bank president. I mean, this is a different world. And I said, Reverend, I was just reading a letter from Bill Ford and Jim Hackett to the Ford Motor Company employees. And here's what they said. They said, we cannot turn a blind eye to systematic racism. They're speaking out. And let me read you what Mary Barr just sent to the GM employees. I didn't know she had this eloquence, but it is phenomenal if you haven't read it. But she wrote about how she was impatient and disgusted with the lack of progress in the treatment of our black citizens and the hand of law enforcement. And she said, as she repeated today, complacency and complicity sit in the shadow of silence, a call from the leaders of this company. And Reverend Anthony says, this is an historic moment. For all the years that African Americans' rights have been violated by a police department, we have not had the white leadership of this country step up and make it their issue. And what he said to me yesterday was, this is commendable that they are writing to their own folks, but America needs to hear this. the business leaders and the executives in New York and Los Angeles and Boston, Philadelphia and Los Angeles, all across the country, need to understand that they have to be a part of the change, that their voices and influence in their city halls, in their state governments, and the federal government have got to be heard. And Reverend Anthony said to me, it'll never work with a collection of emails. He said, do you think there's any chance that you could get 2 or 3 of them to stand together and make clear their personal commitment? And I said, I don't know. And so I started calling yesterday afternoon. Now, you're talking about corporate leaders who are dealing with companies in a terrible recession. They have a lot of pressures. I made 9 phone calls to our 9 biggest employers, and the CEOs of every single one showed up here today. We aren't here today with the final solutions. We're here today to say that the conditions of systemic racism in law enforcement will change when everybody joins the cause. And I hope we see the corporate leaders from the rest of America join them soon. And with that, I know everybody up here moved significant schedules to be here, but we'll have time to take 1 or 2 questions.
Mayor Duggan, Reverend Anthony, I'm out of Detroit Free Press. I think we've all been at gatherings like this where we hear some great speeches, some great proclamations. What's different about this? And Reverend Anthony, what have you seen that makes you believe that we won't be back here a year from now doing the same thing?
Thanks, ML. First of all, I don't remember seeing nothing like this. I don't remember ever seeing corporate leaders, at least in my generation, coming together like this for this issue. This issue has been such a wrenching one that everybody feels compelled. And it is important for, and I'm glad you asked that question, it's important for white America to hear from white America. It's important for the business community to engage in. They're citizens too. They have a stake in this. And so other people listen to people that they know that are like them. And they can make a difference in law enforcement. They can make a difference with our legislative bodies. They can make a difference in the halls of Congress and in the halls of the White House, whoever happens to be there, because these are voices that people listen to. And it's important for folk in the community to understand that their leaders in the corporate suites also are human beings, and they feel this stuff. There are certain tangible things that can come out of this. Number one, hold people accountable for their misdeeds. That's what they're saying. Everybody who's involved in that situation should be held accountable. That's important. In addition to that, we want to make sure that police departments, where they have the rogue cops, not all of them, but where there are rogue police officers, are held accountable. There should be community policing. There should be police review boards. Follow the tenets that we already have. We already have a blueprint. It's called the 21st Century Task Force Police Report on Police Commissions and police community policing. Use it. We can go back to the Kerner Report in 1967. Blueprint. We have not listened to it. We have not utilized it. Implement it. They can insist upon that. Appoint people who are next to you that are going to be sensitive to the issues around the community. Diversity, inclusion, which they're talking about. I don't believe that it's going to be like it is now. This is too important for them to go back and for us to go back and to do nothing. If that occurs, shame on us. Shame on us. Another generation, as Dan Lepp said, should not have to be telling their children, this is the way you act when you go outside and you encounter police. I should not have to run from the police. I should be able to run to them. Let me make it real simple. Stop killing black people. It's just that simple. Stop it. Take them to jail if they've done something wrong. Put them before the judge and the court. Let them make a decision. Let them do time. Don't let them do death. You are not the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And good cops have got to extract and point out the bad ones. It's real simple. This is not difficult. And I'm just glad, as the mayor's indicated, that these, because a lot of them, keep in mind, ML, I have people in the community that are going to say, well, you're going corporate now. That's why I didn't wear a suit like they got on, because, I mean, so that I can relate. But I know they have people and business people that's not going to like this. That's going to differ with this. So we all have a stake in this. But as Dr. King said, the time is always right to do what is right. This is right.
Okay, time for one more question. Anybody else? All right, thank you very much for being here. If anybody wants to stay and ask me things unrelated to this, I'll stay around for a few minutes. Thank you all for being here.
在这个必须保持社交距离的时候，我们可以一起做一件事，完成2020年人口普查。你的回复对于医疗保健、公共设施和教育在未来10年的规划非常重要。现在上2020 census.gov， 花几分钟时间便可以带来改变。为了你的社区和开展美国的未来，即刻上2020 census.gov/languages 回复人口普查。